Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums. Today, we've got special guest back again after his first appearance a week ago, Mr. Martin Popoff from Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles and Banger TV. Martin, welcome back to the show. Appreciate having you back.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me, Pete. It's very cool.
So today, we're talking about one of Martin's favorite topics, and it's a guy that I dig his music quite a bit. We're talking about Ted Nugent. We're going to rank the Nugent studio catalog. I do want to preface this by saying this is strictly a show about Ted Nugent's music. We're not here to talk about Ted's viewpoints, political or social. Sea of Tranquility nor Martin is going to give any kind of comment on whether we support them or not. So it has nothing to do with this conversation. Strictly the album, strictly the music. So if you come in here and you want to, start up dialogue about the things that he does and says, please take it somewhere else, right? This is just about the albums today. So how we normally do these, it's kind of like a ranking from least favorite to favorite. So we've got 15 studio albums. Only the studio albums, all right? We'll probably, there's probably some that are going to be like, well, how come you're not including Intensities and 10 Cities? Because that's all new material, but it's live. We decided not to, okay, for various reasons, but just the studio albums. I'm going to let Martin kick it off with his number 15, and then we'll kind of ping pong back and forth till we get to the number 1. So, Martin, what do you got at number 15?
Okay, so at number 15, I hate to say this, it pains me to say this, but I want to preface this with saying you're going to be very surprised that I'm going to have some very recent Ted Nugent albums way up my list as we go on. But I have to start with his last album, The Music Made Me Do It. I'm really kind of ticked off and perturbed that it's a very short album. It's only 37 minutes. It's got a remake of Cat Scratch Fever and Backstrap Fever. It's got Sunrise, which is this instrumental, and then there's a bass version of it. It's got an acoustic version of Fred Bear. So, I mean, the thing starts off strong with the song, The Music Made Me Do It. I don't like that title. Reminds me a little bit of This Note's for You, Neil Young. It's kind of just an awkward, bad little joke. But I mean, the album starts out strong. The band's playing great. Ted's guitar playing just gets better and better. There's a great song, another great song, another pretty good song. And then it starts to go downhill, and it's just got all this jokey stuff in there. There's like a bluesy tune, with a female guest singer. I can't even remember who it is, but it just seems like an odds and sods EP. And at 37 minutes, it's just way too short. It's just a phoned in album. It's not really an album, and that's why I don't like it.
Yeah. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes again, but I honestly don't even think that's an album worth owning. It's just not very good. It's not very good. My number 15, 1986, Little Miss Dangerous. I find a good chunk of his like late 80s albums just really, really forgettable and just lacking any of the Nugent fire. Couple decent tracks here, but I don't know. This is not the Ted Nugent I like to listen to. Production's kind of flat. It's, it came from that era, right? I mean, so many legacy bands were doing similar type, fare around the mid 80s. And I think Ted just kind of got caught up in the whole scene. And, I know we hate to use the term hair metal. Everybody uses it, but I think this is kind of Ted's hair metal period as far as sound goes. I just think it's a lightweight album, and it's one that I never visit at all. So that's my number 15.
Okay.
Back to you.
Very cool. My number 14 is the Nugent album. And I just found this record to be really sort of flat, neither here nor there, not the early heavy Ted Nugent. I mean, it's organic sounding enough, but it just seems to be melodic and simple and badly arranged. Carmen Appice plays drums on it. I don't think he helps the cause very much. There is some Derek St. Holmes on it. I just found it kind of mellow and lifeless. It almost reminds me of, I know we're not talking about Intensities and 10 Cities, but that bad level of songwriting, like no one expected that record. That is a live record, but it's all originals, right? That aren't on any albums. But it's just bad songwriting, and I think that bad songwriting kind of infects this Nugent album. And don't like the title Nugent. It's just I don't know. It's a weird period. Hair metal hasn't started yet. It's not heavy like it was new wave of British heavy metal or anything. It's not like the old stuff. it just feels like another phoned in album, like my number 15 choice.
Here, my number 14. We're going to stick to that same period, 88. If you can't lick 'em, lick 'em. Just another forgettable album for me. And you know what's crazy is you look at the back cover, right? And here's Ted and around these million guitars, and you think this is going to be like this big guitar onslaught, and it really isn't. It really isn't. I don't know. I find that you mentioned something about bad songwriting, bad lyrics, and I find I think it kind of started with Intensity's Intensity. I find a lot of the songs and songwriting from Ted throughout that decade is really juvenile. Like ridiculously so. And I have a problem with a lot of these 80s albums. For me, they're just like, should have been so much better. And again, another album I very rarely visit anymore. Back to you.
Cool. Well, I'll be getting to those records pretty soon. I think we're in agreement there. We're generally in agreement the way this is all working out. But okay, so my number 13 is Spirit of the Wild. I don't know. I mean, this could have been, theoretically a better record. This is coming off of his run in Damn Yankees, of course. That was kind of a big deal. I like Damn Yankees even better than this album. And oddly, this record is very much like my number 14 choice, Nugent, to me. To me, it seems just very kind of like melodic, again, badly arranged. These sort of, Fred Bear is, I don't know. We all have this in-joke about Fred Bear among Ted Nugent fans. Ted loves Fred Bear, and nobody else I know likes that song at all. I don't like it. It sounds like he's singing a little out of tune. There's almost no riff to it. The lyrics are good. That's cool. And I think that's the main reason Ted likes it. But it just seems like this kind of like semi-heavy, phoned in, sort of almost like a demo, really, to me. So that's kind of a weird thing about Fred Bear. But I don't know, Thiracious and Wrong Side of Town. It just seems like, again, as you just said about the albums you just did, Pete, it definitely feels like we're having a real problem writing songs, grasping at straws. And it doesn't feel like he understands kind of where he wants to be in this time. This is like 1995, right? Yeah. So he's just a man at a time. He doesn't know what to do with himself at this point. So yeah,
I think what you said about the kind of like a phoned in demo quality, semi-heavy statement is true for a good chunk of this catalog, unfortunately, right?
Yeah, exactly. So. Go ahead.
My number 13, I'm going to go back to one you already mentioned, The Music Made Me Do It from 2018. I think you've said enough on that. We've covered that enough. I just think that it's kind of a mess of an album. And compared to the album that came before it, a huge letdown.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'll kick it back to you for number 12.
Yes, well, my number 12 is one that you just mentioned, If You Can't Lick 'Em. I mean, you're going to find some of these sort of hair metal period albums, these 80s albums, a little higher in my ranking, but this one I find to be kind of the worst of them. It's the one where it's a little bit like it's his Judas Priest Ram It Down a little bit. He's trying to get a little heavier again, but the songwriting isn't there. He doesn't know what to do. He's got an anonymous band. I mean, I'm looking here, Dave Amato, Jay Winding, John Purdell, Chuck Wright on bass, Pat Torpy from Mr. Big. Tom Werman is a producer on, it looks like part of it. I mean, it just seems like a dog's breakfast, as they say in the UK, of just not knowing what to do with himself. I don't like the production. The humor is flat. Again, he's moving away from the Penetrator, Little Miss Dangerous phase. He's theoretically doing what we should all like as Ted Nugent fans more and being a little heavier. So in that respect, it's also his Iggy Pop Instinct album a little bit, where he's doing what you want him to do, be heavy, but it's like he's forgotten how to be heavy. So there's a lot of pinging guitar going on and stuff that gets a little annoying. I just feel it falls a little flat.
Yep, I agree. One thing too, early in the catalog, Nugent was well known for coming up with some pretty terrific riffs, and lots of them on every album. And I think a lot of these albums that we've talked about here already don't have a lot of memorable riffs, and that's what you want from a Ted Nugent album. And I think they suffer because of that. You know, the solos are great, but the lyrics are kind of crappy. He's got different players on every album, so there's no continuity at all. It didn't work for me. My number 12, Spirit of the Wild, which you already mentioned. You know, this album's a little crunchier on the guitar end of things, but again, the songs are just not overly memorable, which is why it's kind of sitting down so far on my list. So back to you for where are we? Number 11.
Yeah, my number 11 is Little Miss Dangerous. You know, I kind of like this album. I don't mind Ted in the hair metal range of things. I did an episode recently of my History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff podcast called The Foreigner Effect, and there we included Brian Howe in this Ted Nugent era. So in the hair metal era, Ted is kind of doing like a modern day Bad Company a little bit. And he's got some radical production, some really clattery drums, which, you know, on the face of it, you would say are really like not going to stand the test of time, and they sound really 80s. But I like that they're quite radical on this album. So you know, and this was a little bit of a hit for Ted. He kind of came back. This is probably his biggest album of the 80s. So yeah, I mean, High Heels in Motion, the song Little Miss Dangerous was, I'm not crazy about that one, but Savage Dancer, I kind of like. Crazy Ladies, I kind of like. When Your Body Talks. So I thought this record had a little bit of personality to it, a little bit of jump, a little bit of energy, a little bit of purpose. You know, Ted's not a hair metal guy, but it's kind of cool that when he went hair metal, he had really strange 80s production, but he also had this rootsy Bad Company vibe that comes from a Brian Howe, who of course is not in Bad Company yet at this point. He's going to do that later. Rest in peace. He just recently passed away. But yeah, did not mind the Little Miss Dangerous album at all.
Okay. My number 11, Shut Up and Jam, 2014. You know, this, I like his guitar tone on this album. There's some pretty fun, the title track is fun. Everything Matters is cool. You know, then you got some silliness. I Love My Barbecue and what have you, Throttle Down. But I think that his kind of go for the throat mentality is back kind of in semi-fine form on this album, which again makes the follow-up all the more disappointing, right? Because I thought this was a pretty decent affair. And, you know, coming from a guy that I kind of was getting a little down on because he hadn't really put out anything really, really worthwhile in quite a long time, I thought this was a pretty good return to form. And his guitar tone sounds pretty ferocious on here. And I think that was, for me, that was the big seller of this album. Cool.
All right. My number 10 now is Penetrator album. So this is the first of his I consider a duology, really. There's just the 2 hair metal albums, I think, with Ted, really, which is this and Little Miss Dangerous. So this is 1984, and it's the first one with Brian Howe. And yeah, Tied Up in Love, Where Do You Draw the Line? I just thought there was a lot of passion on these songs. Blame It on the Night. You know, there's a little bit of, outside songwriting, I believe, on this. But yeah, the band, you know, of course, Brian Howe is a big part of it. He's the lead vocalist. The rest of the guys we don't really know: Doug Luban, Bobby Chouinard, Alan St. John. But yeah, I just think, again, it sounds a little bit like Little Miss Dangerous with that clattery, awesome production. Ashley Howe produced this, who is a producer of that really cool period. I can't remember which one. Is it Equator or is it Head First? But Ashley Howe is in there. It might even be all of them. Abominog. That period is some Ashley Howe production, and it's kind of cool. He gives this really cool commercial vibe to Ted during this time. So yeah, Penetrator, pretty high up my list.
Yeah, my number 10 is also Penetrator. I dig this album. This is one of my more enjoyable albums from this period. I agree with you on the production. It's big. It's bombastic. I like the production on those Uriah Heep albums you mentioned. I don't like it, without getting into a whole Uriah Heep conversation. I think Equator is a pretty weak album, but those other 2 are fantastic and, man, full of life that I think brought Uriah Heep back on the planet in the eyes of a lot of people. But I think Tied Up in Love is a great song. Yeah. And, you know, really, really memorable. Should have done bigger business. Go Down Fighting, Thunder Thighs. I mean, I think this is a pretty strong record, again, which considering the couple that came after it, I don't like nearly as much. But this one, a little bit near and dear to me. Back
Cool.
to you.
Okay. All right. My number 9 is Shut Up and Jam, which you just talked about. I love it. I mean, I almost feel guilty not putting it higher. And frankly, out of the last, say, 10 years, anytime I pull out a Ted Nugent album, it is one of these recent ones. And Shut Up and Jam, I play a lot. I just love the fact that it's, you're going to see later up the list more recent ones. I won't give those away yet, but I find essentially that Shut Up and Jam finds him going back to a very organic 70s production sound, and the guitar playing is on fire, and the songs on here. I mean, I think of things like Fear Itself, Throttle Down, Do Rags in a 45. The one with Sammy Hagar, a little bit too party. I don't like, Ted's a little bit like Anvil to me, in that there's a little bit too much joking around quite often. And so he has that little, it's literally the same percentage of Anvil. It's like 21.5% of every album is jokey, right? So essentially there is some of that jokey stuff on here. I'm not crazy that it's not a very long album, again, but I love the production. I love the guitar playing. I'm one guy that will defend to the death Ted's vocals. I love when Ted sings. I have no problem with Ted singing every song if he wants to. So I love that. And yeah, I think as a guitarist, Ted really deserves a lot more credit because he's just effortlessly tearing off these licks that have these links to the past, but doing it in a pretty heavy metal context. And this is a pretty heavy album. And so, yeah, I just love it. And I love it that it's different from the two before it as well. I thought he kind of changed a little.
Yep, I agree. That's good stuff. My number 10, I have a feeling is going to be a little higher up on your ranking, but I do dig it. 2007's Love Grenade.
Okay.
Pretty heavy in-your-face album, I think. And you'd probably agree, one of his heavier albums of the last, 25 years or so. The title track is quite good, Still Raising Hell, Geronimo and Me. And again, you get a lot of tracks on here. And I did a show recently with a couple other guests who we talked about how in the CD era, a lot of artists tend to put way too much material on an album. And I think this album might have benefited from a little bit of trimming, because I think overall it's a pretty good collection of songs. Good production on here as well. I enjoyed this one. Unfortunately, it didn't sell a lot, right? I mean, he's had a couple strong ones in the last 20 years that I think should have gotten more attention, but people aren't buying albums anymore, unfortunately. So I think that Ted has not benefited from that. So, all right, where are we at? Number 8. Back to you.
Yes. Okay. So my number 8 is Weekend Warriors. So it's a little bit down the list, and I think a lot of Ted fans would definitely put this quite a bit higher up the list. I just found, I love the album cover. The album cover is
amazing.
Great. But basically, I find this album to be, one of my complaints with Ted in this quote unquote classic period is that the productions are a little thin. I've interviewed Tom Werman about this stuff before, and Tom kind of has this ethic where it's all about the guitars, the rhythm guitars. But when you do that, you lose a lot of the bottom end. And I find it doesn't really make it all that more powerful. I mean, there is this whole debate that you can have about records being made for radio. They sound better on radio than they might on a good stereo. And Ted's records of this period, Weekend Warriors is definitely one of these that I find is a little bit thin. But song-wise, I love Venom Soup. I love Name Your Poison. I consider those the two heaviest songs on the album. But, Need You Bad and One Woman, and I got the feeling there's this kind of thin, again, jokiness or at least lightheartedness to some of these songs. Tight Spots I don't think is very good. Smokescreen is pretty good. Weekend Warriors, again, has that silly sort of riff sound, that I often call a sweet and sour sound. I get a lot of heck for saying that about the song Number of the Beast. I find it sing-songy or sweet and sour, right? and I find a little bit about that about Need You Bad and Weekend Warriors. Cruisin's a good heavy one. Good Friends in a Bottle of Wine. So, I mean, it's got some good songs on it. So, but I just think all these songs had, I think they could have used a little bit of alcohol to make this record and some really hefty production. I think almost had they recorded it live off the floor, I think it would have been a better record.
Yeah, I think there's a certain lack of kind of heft to that production of that album, and I totally agree. I remember the first time I ever heard it, I was kind of like, this is like it's missing something. But I think the songs are pretty damn good. But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
My number 8, I'm ranking a little higher than you did, and I'll kind of get into why. So 1982, self-titled. For me, I think the songs are fine for the most part. The lineup is pretty damn good. I think this was a missed opportunity because I think this should have been a huge record for Ted. You know, he's got Car on a Piece on the album, didn't really make a much of an impact. He got Derek St. Holmes back singing some stuff on here. I think some of the songs are pretty good. But again, I'm going to go back to what you were just talking about. The production is lacking some kind of fire, some heft. It's just not heavy enough. It's like we don't want to hear Ted Nugent albums sounding all clean and sterile and bright and shiny. For me, that's not what you want to hear out of Ted. And I think, there's some good songs on here. Don't Push Me, Bound and Gagged, Habitual Offender. There's some good tracks on here. I just think that with different production style, they would have made it a little more crunchy, a little heavier. This would have been the album that would have kind of jump-started his career again. It didn't really do that. And I think it comes across to a lot of people a little flat. I get it. I'm more ranking it where it is because I think the potential was here. I think it was just a missed opportunity on the production end, and it just should have been a bigger sounding album considering all who's on it and the fact that the tracks are pretty decent. So that's my number 8.
Okay, all right. So my number 7 is this record. Here's my Cat Scratch Fever tab book. And there's the record. There's the Derek and Ted signatures on the back.
Very nice.
So yeah, I mean, this is a record that a lot of people would put higher. It's Ted's biggest record. I was never a big fan of the song Cat Scratch Fever. I did an episode of my podcast where I talked about the A-B switch that one could apply to modern heavy metal riffs and boogie woogie, and this is a perfect example, a little bit like Kiss Strutter, where you've got kind of like lapsing into lazy booginess between the modern heavy metal, and you can hear that on this song. Just a side note, an example of a song like that. Wang Dang Sweet Poontang is on this, which is really heavy. Out of Control is pretty heavy, but a lot of these songs are a little bit like the Weekend Warrior songs, a little bit lighthearted. And again, the production is the same darn thing we said about Tom Werman's productions. They're just a little bit thin. Sweet Sally's a pretty cool song, heavier than its title. Working Hard, Playing Hard's a good song. But yeah, just overall, it's not really that particularly heavy. And, another thing I'm not crazy about, Cliff Davies' drumming on these records, he's one of the most behaved drummers you will ever hear. And the drumming is just very, very bare bones and behaved. I really don't think it's probably his fault. It's probably a combination of the boss, Ted, telling him, don't do anything fancy.
I guarantee you that was the case.
Yeah, just keep it straight, right? And Tom Werman is probably agreeing with Ted on that. So basically, you don't get much of a rhythm section in these Ted records. It's kind of all about Ted. And Derek. Derek's a great singer, and you get a lot of Derek on this. But yeah, I'm sure most people would rate this quite a bit higher. But it does kind of leave me a little bit cold as a record.
Yeah, I hear you. My number 7, going to go to 2002 for Crave Man. This is a pretty huge sounding record. You got Ted with the scowl on the back. I remember when this first came out, I was like, holy cow, Spitfire Records, which at the time was trying to be like the next big up and coming heavy metal label. And I just think there's some really heavy, exciting stuff on this particular album. And his guitar tone is big and raunchy. The guitar solos are fiery. Vocally, he even sounds pretty good on this album. I don't know. Again, way too much material for me. I found, especially as I've gotten older, that some of these CDs with like 13, 14, 15 tracks, it's like by number 11, you're like already, it's like, okay, enough. We've had some good stuff, but don't pack it too much in, right? Because I get CD fatigue these days. But, some good material on here. Love the production, and I think it's got some of his most inspired playing in the latter part of his career. I have a feeling it's going to, well, obviously it's going to rank a little higher on your list. I've actually heard you talk about this a lot, and I've read your book, and I know how highly you rate this and Love Grenade. So I'm ready to hear some of your commentary on that. So back to you.
Very cool. Awesome. Okay, so my number 6 is the Ted Nugent album.
Wow.
And that's amazing to me. 6, that's pretty low, isn't it? It's supposed to be higher. To me though, this is Ted's Toys in the Attic. Basically, he's coming at this after a long career as the Amboy Dukes, but then 2 albums in Call of the Wild and Tooth, Fang, and Claw, which are essentially, roughshod demo-y versions of this actuality, this sound. Like this is the transformation to the first one where it's just Ted Nugent as a band concept, and it's actually not a whole different band from the previous incarnation. But yeah, so just like Aerosmith, I think they're kind of getting it together with Aerosmith and getting it more together with Get Your Wings, and then they really get it together with Toys in the Attic. I think this is Ted's Toys in the Attic. It's a great record. Obviously, Stranglehold is his flagship song of all time. I think it's a little overrated. I think it's his Child in Time or his Stairway to Heaven. 2 long songs that get a little boring, and I'm not that crazy about them. But I love Stormtroop, and I love Just What the Doctor Orders, Snakeskin Cowboys, Motor City Madhouse. One of the first speed metal OTT songs of all time. Queen of the Forest is just really good, melodic, crunchy, pretty heavy for 1975. Really tight playing. A lot of Derek St. Holmes lead vocals. I think it's a good album with a lot of magnetism to it. And again, maybe it's also a little bit of Ted's Rush Fly By Night in a way. It's where the personality starts really coming out in the band, and there's some excitement about it. I mean, it was an instant hit. He did really well with this album. But you say instant hit, poor Ted had been going since about 1970 or 1966. And literally, I think Ted, if I recall interviews I've had with him, I mean, he was kind of starting to do rock and roll even before the 60s started. Like I think 1959, Ted started being a rock and roller. It's a little bit like Lemmy. I mean, Lemmy can kind of go back that far, right?
I mean, come on, Martin. Can't you picture Ted in like diapers with a Gibson guitar jamming away? I mean, I can.
Yeah. But yeah, obviously by this point, Ted had something like 8 or 9 albums out. I mean, he had a lot of records out by this point. But yeah, glad to see Lou Futterman getting involved and Tom Werman and turning Ted into a hit with this record. Yep.
And you brought up a good point before about how a lot of people consider those last 2 Amboy Dukes albums basically almost like Ted Nugent solo albums. That they kind of are. So I totally agree on that. My number 6, 1980 Scream Dream. Back in the day, I wasn't a massive fan of this album. I thought this is kind of where he started to put a lot of those really silly lyrics in there. But I have really warmed up to this in more recent times. And I actually think this is a really fun album. To me, this is Ted's really fun album, the silly as some of it is. And it kicks ass from a kind of heavy and guitar perspective. Wango Tango, Scream Dreams, Flesh and Blood, Spit It Out. I mean, all sorts of really fun rockers on here. And just the cover and the back cover, it's just all silly, all fun, all Ted. I dig it. So that's my number 6.
Awesome. Okay. My number 5, where is it here? My number 5 is Love Grenade. So I rate this album super high. I mean, I basically love this era of Ted. And when I did the Ted Nugent books, where we got here? So we got, first was Epic Ted Nugent. And then this was updated by Weimer Publishing. I think I did a bunch on Shut Up and Jam in this. So this is a little updated. This one has more pictures. I still have some of this. But when I did these books, I enjoyed doing these books, or this book, because I loved the modern era of Ted so much. I just thought Love Grenade was a super heavy record. Some of my favorite Ted songs of all time are on here. In Still Raising Hell. What else? Geronimo and Me, I believe, would be Aborigine for sure. Stand, Broadside. Later in the track sequence. I love this. I often argue this about the Deep Purple Abandon album. It's like, no, you got to believe me. Abandon is incredible. Stick around to the second half; it will blow your mind, right? And I feel the same way about Love Grenade. I know what you mean, Pete, about these albums having too much on them, and the stuff that could have come off of this is the same stuff that could come off the Anvil albums and the jokey stuff. It's all the jokey stuff, right? I just want that stuff removed from it. So I want Girl Scout cookies off this album. I want the recover of Journey to the Center of the Mind off this album. What else is on here? Actually, the most, I think Lay With Me is kind of a throwaway song. So there's 13 songs on it. It's not crazy long, but the production is just crushing on this record. Is this a Tommy Shaw one, or is the other one the Tommy Shaw one? I remember talking to Tommy about it, and basically I told him, like, it doesn't matter which one of these you produce because they both sound exactly the same. This one and Crave Man are produced like identically, but they're two different producers. Anyway, sorry, I'm letting you down. I forget who produced it. But anyways, super heavy album. I love that Ted's back. I love his guitar playing. I love the heaviness of it. There's just such a sense of mission on the Love Grenade album.
And Martin, I think, just showed us the original album cover on there, right? Is that the controversial one?
Definitely actually, yeah. Yeah, here's the other one. Here's the one.
That's what I have.
Yeah. So and the other one, yeah, it's crazy that he got away with that. Well, he didn't. Ted didn't get away with anything. Because Ted is a pariah right now. He hasn't gotten away with anything he's done. But yeah, he did have that cover on it, and yeah, unfortunately, in the not getting away with it part, Ted's concerts, you know, he is a persona non grata, so his concerts are really down the food chain now, right? His record sales are really super low. So these records are more or less ignored. And I think that's a travesty because I love 3 of the last 4 Ted Nugent albums.
All right, number 5, 1978's Weekend Warriors. I agree with Martin. Production lacking. I think the songs are pretty damn good. Cover is outstanding.
While you're talking, I just got to grab something across the hall here. Keep going.
You got it. Name Your Poison, I Got the Feeling, Venom Soup, right. Smokescreen. Smokescreen is actually one of my favorite Nugent songs, believe it or not. I think that's got a absolutely snarling riff in that song. It's heavy as all hell. But I like the songs. It's just the production's really flat. It should have been a lot heavier, a lot more raunchy. So, but I still dig it. It's still a top Nugent album for me. So back to you for number 4.
Okay, so number 4, hopefully I don't repeat myself too much, but again, Crave Man. I just think these two go together. They're identical. I think the songs, frankly, from these 2 records are completely interchangeable. These albums are so alike, and I love them both. They're both so heavy. I love the song Crave. I love Raw Dogs and Warhogs. Damned If You Do. What else is super good on it? Change My Sex. Got to be one of the greatest Ted Nugent songs. Like, the riff is just crushing on that song. And what else we got here? I Won't Go Away is amazing. Going Down Hard. So much good stuff. But again, a little bit of jokey stuff. Wang Dang Doodle. My Baby Likes My Butter on Her Grits. Cluster Funky, the beginning one. Earth Tones is a little bit of a throwaway. But again, 14 songs. And literally, I mean, I have argued this. I have made lists of Ted Nugent songs. I swear, this probably has 4 of my top 12 Ted Nugent songs on it. It's just so heavy and so well put together. And again, just such a killer sense of mission and going for the throat on this record. So I had no hope for this record whatsoever. After the 80s, after Damn Yankees, after Spirit of the Wild, I just thought there's no way he's ever going to make a good record ever again. And he came back with a great record.
Probably should have released that album in 1982. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good point. Yeah, he would have dominated the new wave of British heavy metal had he made
big time. Like that. Big time. My number 4, State of Shock. Man, how about Paralyzed, huh? Take It or Leave It. Title track, Satisfied, Snake Charmer. I don't know, man. Again, little wishy-washy on the production side for me, but I think that this is a kick-ass collection of songs. And I'm going to talk about it more on my next selection, but there's like similarities I hear on these couple of albums to a whole other genre that I'm starting to kind of detect in this period. In fact, I'm going to stop right there, and I'll pick it up with my next one, because it's like I wanted to mention it when you talked about the album, but I'll bring it up in a second. So go for it. Number 3.
Number 3. So we are at the hallowed top 3 now, aren't we?
Yep.
Okay, so my number 3 would be Free for All. Love Free for All. This is the first time, this is actually the first major concert I ever went to. I grew up in a small town in British Columbia, Canada. So a long ways from anywhere, 10,000 people. But our big town that we went to all the time was Spokane, Washington, 2 hours directly south into Washington State. So I saw Ted Nugent on this tour with Rex backing up, super heavy band Rex from Rex, right? You know, they had the Red album Rex, and then Where Do We Go From Here? Both basically sound like a cross between an Aerosmith and a Ted Nugent record. So it was Rex, and it was Bebop Deluxe in the sandwich slot in the middle of the 3 bands. So I saw this tour. It blew me away. It was so heavy and so cool. Yeah, love everything about this album. Love the you know, the whole mustache look, you know, the Cheech and Chong look, the French Connection, Rennie Robert, Gilbert Perrault. I was a Buffalo Sabres fan club guy at the time, and just loved this look on my. You know, it reminded me of my dad. My dad had this look. Rick McLeish from the Flyers had this look, right? But yeah, Cheech and Chong was all the rage. So Ted looked so cool in this era, and we got a lot of Ted in this era.
It's all about Ted.
Yeah, it's all about Ted. But it's also all about, I think that one of the flaws on here is the Meatloaf vocals. Bizarrely, Ted gets Meatloaf in when he has this petulant breaking down of relations with Derek, and he gets Meatloaf to sing some of the vocals. But some of the classic super heavy Ted songs are on here: Hammer Down, Dog Eat Dog, I love Free for All, just personality for miles, right? Street Rats is super heavy. Turn It Up is like an early speed metal song. So yeah, this is it's a little austerely produced. To me, this is a little bit of to do the Rush comparison again. This is a little bit of his Caress of Steel after Fly By Night, where the career kind of takes a dip. There's a lot of excitement around the Ted Nugent album. With this album, the excitement kind of went down a tiny bit. There were some complaints in the press, and even I think Ted realized there was some concern that his career was not going in the right direction with this record, which is kind of bizarre. It just didn't have, I guess, a big hit single on it, although I remember hearing Free For All a lot on the radio. I'll start yapping about it. I'll stop yapping about it. I can go on forever, and because we love these last few albums, right? So I'm sure we're both going to talk a lot. So
that's right.
There you go. Free For All.
So my number 3, 77's Cat Scratch Fever, his 3rd release. Again, there's the mustache, right? So what I wanted to say, you know, you brought some good points before about good songs, kind of weird production. I don't know. For me, I listened to this and State of Shock and Weekend Warriors, and I'm almost hearing like a kind of Foghat Boogie meets Southern rock thing going on in his music. And it's just like, what kind of happened to the heft of the first 2 albums? And not that I dislike this album, because obviously it sits at number 3. I think it's more a testament to the songs and the playing on here. But I don't know. I just, that kind of sound permeated his music for a handful of albums. And I never really understood why. Maybe because those other bands, you know, you got Molly Hatchet popping up, all these other bands, very popular at the time. Was it a conscious effort? Did it just happen organically? I don't know. But again, I don't know if I really want to hear Ted Nugent, you know, being a Southern rock act. It's like we want to hear Ted doing that raunchy Ted thing. And I think this album for me would have come up a bit higher because obviously some of the tracks are absolutely killer. But the production is just a little bit lacking for me. So.
Pretty high though. That's pretty cool.
It is pretty high. Yeah, I think, like I said, it's a testament to the songs for me.
I love that idea. Yeah, I mean, there is, and it's funny. I never thought of it this way, but it correlates a little bit with that rootsy Bad Company feel later on as well. You know, he even injects that into his hair metal era. So that's kind of cool. That sort of Foghat thing. Okay, so my number 2 is that's what I wanted to grab. I forgot to bring it over. This is my number 2. Scream Dream, and there's Ted and Charlie's autographs on there, and I do a lot of this in my office, frame these things up with passes and stuff and stick them on the wall. But I love Scream Dream so much because, you know, it's funny you brought that up earlier. It's like it's like exactly the same experience as you, Pete. Like the idea that there was that jokiness that ticked you off for a lot of years and a lot of decades, but then the charm of that record just starts coming around, and you just realize it's a fun record, but it's also a super heavy record with, well, not super heavy, but it's got Flesh and Blood and it's got Scream Dream. These really cool killer songs that are heavy. Again, very behaved rhythm section on it, but I don't know. I just feel like where's my vinyl of this? So yeah, Spit It Out I love on this. Come and Get It. Terminus El Dorado is a jokey one, which I actually like because Scream Dream just as a concept wins you over. So even when he's doing jokey stuff, you give him the poetic license to do the jokey stuff. But Wango Tango is a jokey song. Now that's one I was never that crazy about. I just feel like it's a little underwritten. It just seems like a jam to me more than anything. Hard as Nails is cool. I Gotta Move. Violent Love, good heavy one. So yeah, this is it's in that era where he's kind of losing the plot. Heavy metal is a little bit losing the plot. Most bands are having trouble. He's in that sort of divorce era of what he's doing. And again, this is the era of my favorite Rich Galbraith photo. Buddy of mine, Rich Galbraith, has taken a lot of classic shots over the years. This is my favorite picture of Ted ever. And this is, I think, 79 or 80. I mean, he's got the big beard going, and he's got the white pants and the wristband. But just this is the hairiest Ted ever was. Possibly, I mean, he looks this way a little bit on what is it, Tooth, Fang, and Claw, I think, as well. But yeah, I just love this photo, and this is that classic era. And you haven't heard my number one, but it obviously, I think you know what it is, and it's from that same era. So there you go, an album that just charms its way into your heart. Scream Dream.
Yep, no, I agree. And you have to wonder if, all right, so the kind of jokey stuff worked on that album. Maybe he should have left it there. I think Ted went to the well way too many times with it. That's my opinion. Yeah. My number two is the debut from '75. Cool. Yeah. Could have been my number one. Could have been. Like Martin said, there's a couple of absolute drop dead Nugent classics on here. I think Queen of the Forest is vastly underrated. Just with the Doctor Ordered, Stranglehold, Stormtrooping, Motor City Madhouse, some classic stuff on here. I just happen to like one album a little bit better. Sorry. All right. Number one.
Okay, my number one is State of Shock. There's my tab book of State of Shock.
Well, you must have been happy that I wore the State of Shock shirt today, huh?
Yeah,
I didn't give it away for me.
I was going to mention that. That is really cool. And there's my State of Shock, signed by Ted and Charlie. We did an episode of our YouTube show, The Contrarians, on Ted Nugent. That's a show where somebody picks an odd choice that is their favorite album, and I argued, for a good 20 minutes about State of Shock. Look at that back cover. That is so cool. In the little, what are those things called? Penny loafers or something? I don't know.
Yep.
Two-tone black that shoes. What a great back cover, eh?
Yep.
But no, what I love about this record, again, it's my favorite era of that Scream Dream State of Shock era, where I think the production's corrected itself. Now, Pete, you mentioned, and very rightly so, very astutely, the production on this, a lot of people complain about it. But I find the production kind of greasy and murky. And I kind of like that. At least it's not like this harsh thinness of the previous two albums, and even a little bit Free for All for that. I'd say just the two. But I find almost that State of Shock is like a concept album, in that the concept is this murky, greasy earth tone, this brown and green kind of, everything kind of like coalesces into one on it. I just feel the songs hang together because they're produced a certain way. There's a certain personality. I love Charlie as a singer. Charlie I love just as much as Derek St. Holmes. And you were right to mention Paralyzed as probably the greatest Ted Nugent song of all time. Just an incredible, incredible song. But also on this, another super, super high Ted Nugent song in terms of greatness is Snake Charmer. Super heavy song. I love Bite Down Hard. I love It Doesn't Matter. State of Shock, the title track, Take It or Leave It, Saddle Sore. Again, something you mentioned, which is kind of cool. I think this does have that rootsy Foghat, that super heavy end of Foghatness to it as well. Just think loads and loads of personality. And again, this is Ted in his Go for the Throat era. I don't know why I always bring this up, but people do say the narrative about him going through a divorce at this time, burning through band members, seeing the career kind of go down a little bit. It's like a little bit like I say about Sabotage, where Black Sabbath is like, you could just see them baring their white knuckles and gritting their teeth and trying to work so hard on making a great record because they're angry. And something about this record sounds angry and charming at the same time and greasy at the same time. So I just think everything comes together on this record to be his best and my favorite Ted record of all time.
Great album cover too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I used to, when I was going to college for one semester, I worked for the campus radio station, and that was the only Nugent album they had in their record collection. I used to play Paralyzed all the time, every time I was on the air.
Yeah.
Had to play it.
Yeah.
All right, my number one from 1976, Free for All.
Yeah, love it. Very
yeah,
cool.
I mean, this is a pretty heavy album, and for me, I think the tracks that Meatloaf are on are terrific. And I think Meatloaf sounds amazing on this album. And it makes you think, well, what if, like, No Bad Out of Hell and Meatloaf became like the full-time singer for Nugent, right? I mean, he's pretty kick-ass on this album.
He wouldn't have any money if he did that.
No, I know he wouldn't have any money. And it probably would be long forgotten. But I think in a weird way, and maybe one of the reasons why this album was not as big a seller, back then, rock fans were very into continuity with lineups. And I think the fact that it's like, is Derek in the band? Is he not in the band? He's only on a handful of tracks. Who's this Meatloaf guy? So on and so forth. I don't think that helped Ted's cause here, because I think people really latched onto the lineup on the first album. And now all of a sudden, well, is that still the lineup anymore? Like I said, who's this Meatloaf guy? But once you get past that, great songs on here. Title track, Dog Eat Dog, Writing on the Wall, Street Rats. I mean, Hammer Down, just killer album. That, you know what, if we would have done this 5 years ago, I would have easily said that the debut was my favorite. This has really kind of risen up for me over the last couple of years, and it's my number one.
Nice.
And the mustache is cool too. Gotta remember the mustache. So that is our ranking the studio albums of Ted Nugent. And for all of you asking, well, Pete, what if you guys included Double Live Gonzo in this list? Well, it wouldn't rank that high for Martin, I bet, because Martin does not like live albums that much. Not as much as I do. Double Live Gonzo is a pretty terrific live album, I will say that. But anyway, that's a story for another time.
It definitely is, because it does bring back the cool tooth fang and claw stuff. And what the heck is it? There's two songs, right? There's two non-LP songs that are super heavy. What the heck? Not is it? Yeah, Wang Dang Sweet Putang, right? Or no, I can't remember what they are, but there are a couple of non-LP songs, or at least one on the Yank Me Crank Me. I think that's on there, right?
Yes, yep,
yeah.
Yep.
And yeah, some great stage patter. I mean, that's where Nashville Pussy got the name of the band, right? From Ted's stage patter on that album. Yeah. And yeah, he's the best. He's the Muhammad Ali of rock when it comes to stage patter. And that's in the golden era of live albums. It's incredible. It's a double album. What a killer album cover on it as well.
And his guitar tone is absolutely ferocious on that album. And Derek sounds great. I mean, Derek is a cool guy, and Derek always sounds good. So it was just a really good live album. Really good live album. So anyway, there you have it. A lot of Ted Nugent talk here for those of you who appreciate the man and his musical genius. So curious to see how everybody else ranks the Ted Nugent catalog. So give us your top 5, your top 10, all 15, whatever you want to do. You're free to do it in the comments below. Martin, thank you so much for joining us here on Sea of Tranquility. We will see Martin back again. We're already talking about some things we can be doing in the very near future. So we'll see you soon. Visit us on the web at www.seaoftranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. For Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Have a good weekend, everybody. Martin, thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Pete. Very cool.
Bye-bye.